what is the future of Anthem? And is there a future of Anthem? That's a question I see a lot.
Yes, there's a future for Anthem. A very bright future, we hope.
Well, folks, it looks like Anthem Next is canceled. Your game is now incomplete. You'll have to make up for it in Dragon Age. For those perhaps unfamiliar with the situation, after Anthem crashed and burned hard, BioWare abandoned the roadmap of updates for their live service game, and a team instead set out to reevaluate the entire darn project and see if they could salvage it into an entirely new game. An Anthem, a realm reborn, if you will. Of course, unlike Final Fantasy XIV, Anthem didn't really have that big of a player base to begin with, and no one bothered to support the original version of the game while they were trying to figure out what to do with the new one. According to recent reports, a couple of weeks ago, the small team that had still been developing this so-called Anthem Next gave a major pitch to EA executives, which was supposed to determine the fate of the project, whether development would begin in earnest with a bigger team or if the game was going to be canned permanently. Now, it's official. The project won't be moving forward, which I honestly don't think is going to surprise anyone at this point, considering BioWare is also developing new Mass Effect and Dragon Age games. Even if the pitch for Anthem Next had been stellar, I imagine there's a desire to wash their hands of the matter and have all hands on deck for BioWare's other projects. My heart truly does go out to the developers who spent years slaving away on this project, both the devs who burnt out along the way trying to conjure that supposed BioWare magic, and those who actually stuck around through the entirety of this next project. All of my jokes aside, and as much as people clown on this whole situation, I am sorry that all the work those 30-odd people were putting into the Anthem Next reboot will never see the light of day. I can only pray that their time on the new Dragon Age game will go more smoothly than this whole mess did. I suppose I should note, if you're new here and you don't know me, that I never played and don't really give a crap about Anthem, but I think even people who played it didn't care much for it, all things considered. I myself am more interested in the overall impact of the game, the business decisions behind it, the toxic work environment behind the scenes, and now the fallout of the whole affair. While I still feel sorry for all of the developers who were mistreated, as well as the next team whose work is now going to be abandoned, I'm kind of happy with how this whole thing worked out. Here we have a major live services game crashing and burning and putting on display just how risky and duplicitous these affairs can be. It's become so easy for these companies to make and sell big, unfinished games and just cross their fingers that things will work out. How many times can developers get away with over-promising and under-delivering with the assurance that the game will get better eventually? What is a post-release roadmap worth if it turns out the game is so fundamentally flawed that the roadmap is abandoned?
Where's the plane?
I do understand the need to find alternative streams of revenue. Big games are getting wildly expensive to produce, and while I'll argue until I'm blue in the face that big companies could still make smaller, cheaper games, I also understand there is a pressure to make games up to a certain level of visual fidelity and production value to draw in mainstream consumers who aren't nerdy enough to know about, say, solar ash and how awesome it looks. So I get wanting to find more ways to make money when games with retail releases all have an agreed upon standard price tag. Be it via DLC, microtransactions, subscription fees, these things are all part of the business now, for better or for worse. Subscription fees have been a thing for MMOs and other continually updated games for years, of course. The problem increasingly lies with games that are trying to skirt out the door with massive problems and promise that those problems will be resolved later. Also, games that change themselves so much after launch that consumers don't even know what they're buying, or that the thing that they bought has morphed into something else entirely over time. Paying money up front for the promise that maybe you'll get something later via a post-release roadmap is becoming increasingly common and increasingly worrying, as well as the idea that you could buy a game, enjoy it, and then 6 months later, the game that you bought and enjoyed essentially doesn't exist anymore because it's been updated into a completely new thing. It's all well and good to buy into something that exists, but nowadays buying into a big game often feels more like you're investing in the game, and that if not enough people invest, you're just gonna lose your money when the project goes kaput, like with Anthem. On the bright side of things, we're reportedly already seeing some positive changes because of all of this. Some anonymous sources spoke with Bloomberg and said that the next Dragon Age game was supposed to have a major multiplayer component, but EA has decided to pivot the game to be a strictly single-player experience. Apparently, the decision was made in light of both Anthem's failure and the, quotation marks, unexpected success of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Apparently, the 10 million units Fallen Order moved removed in its first 4 months wildly exceeded EA's sales expectations. Wowzers, you guys, a Star Wars single-player action-adventure video game released into a market with no Star Wars video games. Who could have predicted it would do so well? So yeah, thank you, Cal Kestis. You may have failed to save the Jedi Order, but at least you managed to save single-player games and maybe indirectly BioWare if Dragon Age miraculously turns out to be a good game now. Well, Anthem, you had a good, well, not necessarily a good run. Heck, you barely even had a run at all, just of any nature. You really were an interesting news story to follow for the last couple of years. May studio executives everywhere learn from your example.
And who'll hear the echoes of the stories never told?
Hi folks, I talked about Jedi Fallen Order a bit during this video, and wouldn't you know it, we're actually wrapping up a playthrough of that game over on our second channel right now. If you aren't one of the 10 million people who bought it already, maybe come check out our LP, it's a fun time. We're also wrapping up Uncharted 1, if that's more your speed.